Welcome to L&D Disrupt, the podcast dedicated to helping you overcome workplace challenges and prepare for the future of work today. I'm your host, Nelson Sivalingam, and I'll be speaking with the movers, shakers, and path breakers in L&D who are reshaping their organizations right now. Join us each week as we delve into the highs and lows of work in the industry to get to the real nitty-gritty stuff that you actually care about. In a demanding environment where you're scaling quickly and hiring fast, it can sometimes feel like everything needed to happen yesterday. Where you originally needed to onboard 10 employees, you now need a program that you can roll out for 100 or even 1,000 people to support your growth. This is where you need to figure out how to work smarter and not harder. Today we're joined by Filip Lam, People Growth at L&D, to really unpick how we can leverage technology to save us time and drive performance in a high growth environment. Filip, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
There's so much to pick apart and understand around the kind of challenges of running people development at high growth companies. So I thought a great place to start is maybe to go, what are the big challenges, right? When you think, what are those top three where you think running people development in high growth, here are my top three challenges?
I think most of it is the same as in any organizations. The biggest difference is that you need everything yesterday. So if it's not already built, you need to do it ASAP. And I think that's the biggest challenge because it's going to pressure you on how you prioritize, how you use your resources effectively, because you will always be under-resourced. And that poses a big challenge.
And what are some of the things that you often see on that list of things that need to be done yesterday, Filip? So when you've done it a couple of times now, joining a high growth company, what are some of the common things that you see? We really need this. We need this yesterday.
Well, if it's a young company growing, then that list is almost everything. So it's going to have things like we really need a strong onboarding in place. We need to onboard, and not just people in general. We need to onboard people in different departments. So the product team will want to onboard people. The engineering team will want to onboard people. Sales team needs to do it as well. And you also need to take care of all the leaders. And there will be different opinions about how and what you should teach people. You need documentation, you need processes, you need things in place, you need systems. So anything you can think of and imagine, it's needed.
So where do you start, Filip? I mean, that sounds like a nightmare, having all of those things in your plate. So where do you start, and how do you decide where you're going to have the biggest impact?
Yeah, I think my view on L&D is that it's there to help the company execute much faster. It's not there to, although it's nice as well to focus on things like growth mindset and helping people. You're helping people by making them perform better.
Right.
So you need to know what are the strategic priorities of the company. What are the things that are absolutely crucial? So when you think about if L&D can keep up with or even support the growth of the company, what are those levers that you need to do?
Right.
And you'll find that often there are things around culture, around onboarding, and specific things in performance that needs support. And that's where you'll start. If that helps the company move faster, that's where you start.
And that kind of performance-driven learning approach that you just spoke about there, Filip, does that make it easier for you to communicate with the rest of the business? Because you're no longer talking about, I guess, one level away, which is kind of growth mindset and building a learning culture. You're more speaking the same language as the rest of the business, which is performance and how are we going to hit these targets. Have you found that makes it easier to communicate and identify areas where you can collaborate and help?
Yeah, I think so. I think that if anyone who has heard me speak publicly before, I often say that classroom trainings are dead.
Right.
And it's quite controversial to say that when you're in L&D. And also you can just imagine that once when, in my previous company, when they made me head of L&D, that, you go out and say, oh, I'm going to kill all training. That's one of the first things that I do. But it's as long as you focus the conversation on helping people perform better. So if you're a business leader in an organization, when would you, there are so many things that you could prioritize before training, but if the conversation is about performance and helping you reach your goals faster, then there's nothing to worry about. As long as the conversation is oriented towards performance, everybody will be interested in learning.
And what's the best way to have that conversation, Filip? Because, a lot of the L&D teams we speak to have kind of spent years developing the skill to do learning needs analysis and really focus their conversation around learning needs, versus having a performance conversation and identifying performance gaps is a much, much different challenge and requires a different set of skills. So how do you approach those conversations with key stakeholders?
Yeah, I think so. I come from a management consulting background, so that obviously that helps in having those consulting conversations with business leaders and stakeholders. If you don't have that background, obviously you can pick up a book and learn about some of those frameworks. But other things that you can do is to just there is a framework called performance consulting, and that is something else that you can do as well, because I think that will inevitably lead to all of the things that you want to discuss when it comes to training and learning. But if you start from consulting around what leads to actual performance and be able to identify what leads to performance, then nobody will turn down that sort of conversation.
What does one of those conversations look like, Filip? So you reach out to a head of a business function. Do you get them on a call in person, and how does that look like?
Yeah, it can depend. You'll do some research about them and what they are trying to achieve and do, so you sort of know the some of the hot topics that they are already working on. But if you're just starting, some of the things that you can ask are what are they trying to achieve this year or next year, and what do they think is keeping? What's the gap? Where's the execution gap? What are some of the biggest challenges that they have? That they're afraid of, that might keep them from reaching those goals, and that delta and that gap will tell you about what they are worried about and what are some of the things that might need training. And if the discussion moves on to be about training, then you can ask questions about what happens if we don't do anything? Is it really a training issue? And if we do something, what are the behaviors that we want to see happen? And what's how do we measure success? How do we know if we've been successful in doing this? So that's just a few examples of some questions that you can start with, and then you'll dive deeper and get into what is actually the root cause to the problem. In some cases, there will also be people who reach out to L&D departments to just tell them to do a training. Often it can be people don't understand a process, or they've designed something in the organization and then people don't follow that process, and they think, oh, it's because they don't understand how it's done, so they create an FAQ, and then nobody reads the FAQ, and they tell, okay, so now let's contact the L&D team because nobody reads the FAQ and nobody does this, and they ask us a lot of questions, so we need to train them on how to do this. We need to train all the managers, we need to train this and that. Have you ever shopped online and you sit in your couch and you're looking for something, and then when it comes to the checkout and you're about to pay, and your credit card is in the other room, and you're like, forget about it. I'm not going to do it. Yeah. So it's not about knowledge that you don't know where the card is. It's just it's not inconvenient. And a lot of these requests are just, they're thinking of fixing training issues that are just inconvenient to people. It's not that people are stupid or don't know where to find it. It's just it's inconvenient, and it's more convenient to just ask someone. So it's not a training issue. So this is what performance consulting is about. It's about isolating the root cause so that you can focus the training on the things that actually matters. And then the other thing, you can tell them that this is not actually a training issue. You should not create a training on this.
No, I completely agree with that, Filip, and it resonates so much, because we often talk about how when we're introducing How Now into an organization, for example, when you're looking at
what are the friction points? Often the friction point is when you're trying to introduce new habits and new behaviors, right? And the best way to drive learning behavior is to embed learning in existing habits and behaviors, and reduce the barriers for people to create it. And it's, I love the analogy of getting up to go grab your card from another room is that barrier. And the bigger that barrier is, the less likely someone's like to engage, unless, the need is so severe that they're willing to go above and beyond. And that often doesn't happen when you've got time poor employees, especially in a high growth environment. So yeah, that definitely resonates with a lot of conversations I have. Going back to a point you mentioned earlier around the kind of classroom training, I'm sure a lot of people listening are like, what? How can you kill training? Because I'm sure pre-pandemic, most of the training people were doing, or what was considered training and quote unquote L&D, would have been classroom training. So what does a kind of L&D world with no classroom training look like?
It's not, we're not replacing classroom training with another method that solves all issues. I think you need to look into what it is that you actually need to teach people, or educate people, or show people, and then you pick different formats that suit that specific need. The other thing is that I think what classroom trainings never take into account is timing.
Right.
And so it just says, I have this one training, it's just one size fits all, and everybody has to do it. And that's it, and nothing else. And when you remove that barrier, when you remove that criteria, you can personalize, you can deliver things at the right time, you can chunk it up, or chop it up so that it only pieces gets delivered when it's needed. And suddenly you can support someone when they are most motivated to take part of your training. I'll give you an example. We first, why it's such a problem to do classroom trainings, and two, what it could look like. So we had this program to teach managers how to grow people, have coaching conversations and performance conversations with their employees. So we designed a great program. It was a hybrid program where you would read most of the theory online in
right.
an LMS, and then you would come to a classroom and do experiential and simulations, so that you would actually be able to do the things that we were hoping that you could do. And this was made mandatory for all leaders. So it's about 450 leaders in the organization. And each class could take about 12 people. Right. And we would offer the class multiple times a week, and then not everyone would sign up for all of the spots every single week.
Right.
So now you're having people running the same class every single week, and they're busy doing this, so they can't do other things.
Right.
And after half a year, you haven't even gone through like half of the cohort. Right. And the problem now is that you also have turnover and new hires. So the 450 originally now becomes even, you haven't gone anywhere, and, right. and you're still trying to get to all of the people. And some people have to wait 8 months until their first interaction with the process, since it's been launched. And then, by the time we got to a critical mass, the program was scrapped and redesigned. So now you have to start over. So this is the problem with classroom training, where you never, like, if you're working in a high growth environment, even if it's not a high growth environment, it takes so much time or so much resources to get through the whole cohort. So if I take one topic, like onboarding for managers, so managers onboarding their employees, we know that has a big impact on the turnover rate for new hires. We know that has a big impact on how fast they will get to time to performance, and also how engaged they will be. So it's a crucial and a critical moment in the lifetime of that employee. At the same time, so what we used to do is that we would send managers to our classroom training and then train them on how to do this, and then expect them to know all of it. Where to go, which template, which questions, which conversations to have, and so on. But what we did instead now is that we scrapped the whole training, and we said, okay, so we'll keep track of which manager has a hire that starts in the company and when.
Right.
And when that hire starts, 2 weeks before, we will send them this message to prepare them.
Right.
And then on the day that they start, we know that the most important conversation to have is to have a conversation around expectations.
Right.
So we'll send them this information. We'll link to the template that they might need to have that conversation. They'll always have the latest link, latest update, the latest resources, latest documentation. And we'll keep doing this throughout the entire probation period so that they never have to keep track of what's the process like, who is going to help me. Everything is sent to them when they need it and when they're most motivated to read about it. And suddenly you can raise the standards for how managers onboard people, and you didn't need to organize a single classroom training for it.
I love that, Filip. And I guess, you're using data as triggers there and really being smart about how, I assume, you're leveraging technology. So what is the role of technology in building these learning experiences that don't necessarily involve the classroom?
Yeah, obviously it's imperative, and you have to build the infrastructure that you will need to come up with these ideas to be able to do this,
right,
and send them through the channels that you should be using. So for example, in my philosophy is that you shouldn't be forcing people to come to your channel. So the training should exist in the channels that people operate in. So whether people are reading, chatting, and working, that's where you need to be to reach them. So if a company uses Slack, for example, you can use Slack as the communication tool, and also almost like a learning tool to teach them what it is. And they don't need to change to a different environment or learn something new in order to take part of that communication. But then you need tools and infrastructure so that you can actually build automation around Slack and not just your regular tools.
Yeah.
You need to be smart about how you apply those things.
And so how do you go, going back to kind of a high growth company, being the first L&D hire, and you're building out the L&D strategy, often because everything needs to be done yesterday, you prioritize the kind of compliance piece. And often, what I hear a lot of in high growth companies is because you've got a small L&D team, you haven't got a lot of resources, they end up spending actually a majority of their time on the kind of compliance piece, because that is the part where if you drop the ball, the consequences are very visible, right? But that's not to say not doing the other stuff isn't having a consequence that might be a bit more discreet. So how do you find that balance between building out a strategy that does it ticks the box, compliance is obviously essential, you need to do that piece, but that is the bare minimum. And how do you go beyond that when you've only got limited resources and limited time?
It's not easy. You obviously you need to look into the way that you work and organize your quarter almost, so that each quarter that there are a couple of things that you will put in place in order to move things forward. So between being reactive and strategic, you need a couple of initiatives that you need to deliver these things in order to come to a place where you can do this cool stuff. So for me and for my team, it was that we were basing our strategy on digital learning, and you need a system in place, and we needed the automation features in place in order to get to a place where we knew that we could start leveraging our resources on a completely different scale. But then you need to carve out enough time to implement these things, so that you're not just stuck with reactive things. And you just need to be adamant about, setting boundaries and making sure that you have time to take care of the reactive stuff, but not that it's, all of it doesn't need to be taken care of, in the same day, in the same week, or not even the same month. So just make sure that you're working on the right things at the right time.
And what does your kind of scheduling or planning approach look like, Filip? So are you planning on a quarterly cycle, a monthly cycle? What does that planning process look like?
Yeah, for me, I like to think on a 3-year plan.
Right.
So if you think of a story you'd like to tell the business and the world 3 years from now, what would that be? What would that look like? And what's the L&D world you imagine that you are creating? But that 3-year plan isn't going to have, it's going to be not going to be super detailed because a lot of things will change along the way. So most things, it's actually on a quarterly basis where you think about like what's most important this quarter. And then you can break it down even further to see, what's the most important thing right now to work on. And each one of these initiatives that you have, it's actually to make sure that, by the end of the year, you've actually moved forward and you have implemented and come up with new things that did not exist the last year. Right. And unless you are clear about those things, you will always be stuck in reactive things, because the things that people can ask for are what people already know, which is not L&D expertise. It's reducing risk, and it's doing compliance, and it's making sure that their content is being delivered. So if you let people dictate your calendar, they're going to focus on what they know. Right.
And one more question before we go into the quick fire round, Filip. What are the things that excite you in terms of trends and shifts that you're seeing in L&D? Obviously, every aspect of business has gone through a bit of a transformation in the last couple of years. But what are the things that excite you about the changes you're seeing in L&D?
Yeah, I'm seeing higher adoption of technology and more consumer level technology in L&D, and that really excites me. I think that's really important because if you think about like 30 years ago, where you went to really experience, first-class technology was in enterprises. Yeah. And nowadays, when you're 9, you're holding an iPad that is more powerful and more useful than some enterprise technology. So it's very strange that we have more advanced stuff in our private lives than in our companies. Yeah. So being able to see more and more consumer level technology within learning is really cool. So I'll give you one example that we just started implementing in my previous company was personalization through AI in trainings. So you take the same content, you deliver it to 10 people, and all those 10 people will get different content. Right. Even if the same meaning, because the AI will figure out what it is that you don't know and what it is that you need more reinforcement with, and focus on that. And with even 60% less time to go through the entire training, we receive the same efficiency or effectiveness. And these sort of things excite me, because this is some of the things that not just now shows you that you should be using technology because it's digital and it saves you time. You don't need to spend time figuring out why somebody's isn't flying to your office to do the training class. It's actually giving you tools to do things in a much better way than you could ever dream of before.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost to the point now where how can you build an L&D strategy today for the modern workforce without technology being the foundational piece? And it's not a question, right? Because I think it's, especially in a smaller team, it's impossible for you to meet the needs in a personalized and meaningful way of every single individual in your organization without the help of technology. And like you said, we'll be going back to the one size fits no one. And that is, like you said, if you're not learning any things that matter, that help you drive your performance, then you're basically wasting the time and effort and energy of anyone involved. All right, time for the quick fire round. Are you ready, Filip?
I'm ready.
Let's do this. How do you learn, Filip?
How I learn? I like to break things and then put them back together.
Right.
If that makes sense.
As in quite hands-on? Are we talking about as a kid breaking apart a hi-fi system and putting it back together? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, my wife tells me that I don't read manuals or instructions. I just start doing it and then I break it, and then I have to start over again and read it. But then when I actually do it, it all makes sense now. So for me, I like the context. I like the understanding how pieces fit together. But then, in terms of methods, I read, I like podcasts, I like videos, I watch a lot of YouTube. Yeah. So you really talk to people, everything is useful.
That really connects to me, because I'm the same. I read the manual after, when I really get stuck and start with it. And I've often wondered, I like to dissect why I learn in this particular way. But I think there's a really important piece there, which can be applied to L&D, which is when you know the problem, right? You look at, it's like that thing where, you never knew about a word, then you hear a word for the first time and someone explains to you what that word means. Then it all of a sudden feels like you're hearing that word over and over again. It's just you've become a lot more perceptive and receptive to this particular word in the world around you. And I think same thing happens. Anyway, that's my theory, is once you know that problem, you are now, all of your senses are alert, taking in information and looking at it through the lens of the fact that I know this problem, right? So I can imagine when you read the manual after you've earned a bit of context and understood the problem a bit more by being hands-on, I think you're more receptive to information, know how it fits in. But that's my little 2 cents on that. But because I know friends of mine who essentially they will not start anything without having read the manual start to finish. They're like, I need to know everything I can do with this, which is incredible. So you either read the manual first or you're part of the group that doesn't read the manual until after. But we're definitely in the same camp there. Second question is, what do you love the most about your job?
Oh, okay. This one is easy. I think it's a real privilege to work with something where your entire purpose is to make other people better.
Yeah.
That's what I love about it. Yeah.
How do you like to start your day?
I like the idea of going for a run in the morning. I've never done it. But if somebody can teach me how they do it, I would love to start my mornings that way. But I think today, for me, I like to start the day by reading and thinking and prioritizing my day. That's how I like to start.
If you can change one thing about L&D, what would it be?
Well, that's an obvious one. I would say, I would change adoption and implementation of new technology.
And what's the one bit of advice that you've given out the most?
Investing in yourself is probably the best investment you'll ever do.
Agreed.
It's cheesy, but it's true.
Often you find the things that are so trustworthy and cheesy are often true. What's the one book you've recommended the most?
The One Thing, written by Gary Keller. We already touched upon this in this conversation, but it's about the importance of focusing on what is most important. So actually blocking and scheduling the things that will move you forward. Right. So you're not stuck in reactive things. Yeah.
What's your best productivity hack?
Blocking my calendar.
Yeah. As you block all your tasks out, or focus time for you to work on tasks? How do you approach
focus time? Yeah, focus time. So not blocking specific tasks, but blocking, just taking control of your calendar. Yeah. And make sure you have enough time to not just learn, reflect, and also work on the most important things. So if you're, for example, haven't started by thinking about implementing automation in your L&D, well, then you need to start blocking your calendar.
Yeah. What's the one thing you've changed your mind about recently?
I told my friends I wouldn't start playing Wordle, and
you have. And my last one for you, Filip, is, what are you most proud of?
That's a hard one. I would say that it's that I have people around me that loves me and support me. I wouldn't be able to do what I do without them. And I think it's important that you don't forget to invest in those relationships while you're pursuing your dreams.
Filip, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Nelson.
A massive thank you to Filip for joining us on the show and sharing so many practical insights today. We all use tech every single day, but it goes to show there's still so much more we can actually be doing to leverage tech in L&D. Please do subscribe or tell a colleague if you enjoyed today's episode, as it really does help us to continue grow. And as always, you can find details to connect with myself and Filip in the show notes. Thanks, and see you next time.